What is unique about this plan is a couple of things. This is truly a national plan. It is not a federal government plan. We made sure from the steering committee to the central working group to the 26 technical working groups that we had the states, we had the local governments, in addition to federal MDAs, but a very large representation of the private sector, youths, women, people with disabilities. We also had representatives of the major political parties, 3 major political parties. Our intention is that this is a plan that should be owned by every Nigerian, and every Nigerian, every business, every ministry, department, and agency has a responsibility that is clearly defined in the plan.
To emphasize the need for policy harmonization and coordination among the key economic ministries and agencies, the Central Bank, the Finance Ministry, the Customs, the Trade and Investment Ministry, the Ministry of Agri, NIPC, all of them. We want to see a proper harmonization, a proper coordination, a clearing house, so that this will remove some of the uncertainty, some of the concerns that investors have. Secondly, is the fact that I feel that the 14.3% investment that has been projected in this plan for the public sector is a bit on the conservative side, especially having regard to the fact that, yes, the private sector can contribute a whole lot, but the government also has a very big role to play in investing in this economy, particularly in infrastructure.
Your concern still talks to policy harmonization, properly conceived policies and properly implemented policies. Once those ones are in place, there was a time we were talking on this program on why we cannot have a rail line from Kogi, to Abuja. And it had to do with policies on PPPs. So I think this plan is talking to how PPPs would be implemented across segments of the economy.
Of course, the Honorable Minister had identified why this plan is different, which gives us some joy in a way. But the heart of the matter, which should also be a matter of the heart for us nationally, is the fact that implementation is key. Implementation is very, very important. And the potentials of implementation and having impact, especially through the national chambers, through the chambers across the country, is key and very important.
All right, thank you very much, Abu Salam, for those excerpts from the first part of our conversation on this subject matter yesterday. So this morning, we have another set of guests. First, with us in the Abuja studios, let's welcome the Honorable Minister of State, Budget and National Planning, Prince Clem Agba. Honorable Minister, pleasure to have you with us this morning.
Thank you for having me. Good morning, Nigerians.
And also joining us via Zoom, a regular guest on Good Morning Nigeria, is a professor of capital markets at Nasarawa State University, Kefi, and also former commissioner for finance in Imo State, Professor Uche Waleke. Prof, delight to have you again on Good Morning Nigeria.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kinsley. Good morning, Nigerians.
All right, gentlemen, let's begin the conversation first with the Honorable Minister of State, Budget and National Planning. Give us your own perspective on the new National Development Plan. In particular, is this potentially a game changer?
Okay, thank you very much for the question. I personally believe that this is a major game changer. And the reason I say so is that we had taken a look at the previous plans with a view to understanding where they have succeeded and where they have also failed. And then based on those gaps that we have seen, taking actions to correct what had happened in the past. You will see that we have deliberately called this plan a National Development Plan 2021 to 2025. Some people were of the view that we should call it ERGP2. But we reviewed ERGP2 in spite of its successes, even though it didn't meet up to the large objective for which it was set up, because of the issues of ownership, the issues of participation, the issues of inclusiveness. And that is why when you look at the institutional arrangements that were put in place, we said clearly enough from the beginning that government is going to be an enabler and that the driver of the economy should be the private sector. If you deconstruct the Nigerian GDP, 90% of it currently is organized private sector. And the totality of government, it's just about 10%. So it will be absolutely wrong for the institution that is contributing 10% to be the driver or to be the one setting out the plan. And that is why you see that we had a bottom-up approach in the development of the plan. There are 26 technical working groups which fell within 7 clusters. Yes, people always talk about the 6, but the 7th for me, which is the most important part of it, is the cluster that talks about communication of the plan implementation itself, and the financing of idea of what the financing requirements should be. Then the third one is the legislative imperative. To say, are there any laws that are militating against the private sector from being a driver of the economy? So what are those laws? They were identified. Are there policies, that are creating problems and not enhancing growth of the private sector? They were also captured in that volume. And that is the volume that will be used by government to make corrections in order to ensure that the plan itself works well. One major difference, again, with this plan and the previous plan is the issue of drawing budget from plan. The two have to be tied. And one of the resolutions at the Federal Executive Council for the approval of this plan is that going forward, the plans and annual budgets must flow from the plan. The issue of continuity was also taken care of. And that was also part of the institutional arrangements that was put in place. You would, because we didn't want Nigerians to see this as an APC plan or just a Buhari plan. It needed to be a national development plan. And that is why the 3 main political parties at the National Assembly, especially the Senate, were invited to participate in the process and make their own contributions. But over and beyond that, there is the issue of legislating the plan to ensure continuity so that even if there is a change of government, whether it involves parties or whatever, you don't just come and jettison the plan. And even if you have to make some changes, it's not just going to be an easy thing to do. Yes, there could be a couple of tickling, but the overall objectives and strategies of the plan remains, because those are foundational issues. That is why, for me, I have that level of excitement, and we are also using technology to drive what we are doing, building efficiencies into the system. Current M&E process, which is basically manual, we also want to drive it with technology.
All right. Thank you, Honorable Minister of State. Let's go over to Professor Owaleke. Professor Owaleke, what is your own view of this well-articulated national development plan? From yesterday when we started this conversation, a lot of pass mark, has been given to this tied well-timed and well-polished national development plan. You as a professional, what is your own view?
Yeah, thank you very much, Kirian. To borrow your words, the plan is well articulated, and is on that note that I am commending the ministers that championed it. That's talking about the Honorable Minister for Finance and the Honorable Minister for State Finance. I also agree that it promises to be a game changer in the sense that there are aspects of this.
We are currently having issues with the Zoom connection with Professor Waleke there. We hope that the engineers will do the needful for us to return to him. For now, let's come back to the studio here where we have the Minister of State. Sir, you have explained the plan structure.
Yeah.
To say policy issues, prioritized list of programs, legislative imperatives, and what have you. You also said that the annual budget must flow with the plan. What do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is already in the plan process, dealing with this, I'm taking it now from the federal government perspective, the MDAs had already submitted their programs and their projects. These programs and projects which falls within their mandates have been costed. And we know how long it's going to take. So when you follow the principle of zero budgeting, it means that you start and you finish a project. Not that in the year 2021, you start a project, you do it 20%, then in 2022, you come up with a new project. Yet, the first project for 2021 is not complete. So with the legislative imperative that will be put in place, it enables the National Assembly committees on planning to insist also from their end, that the plan structure itself must follow, that the budget must follow the plan. It also empowers the budget office to scrutinize and ensure that the MDAs are following what the plan says. How were these projects costed and allocations made? We had to use some modeling techniques. We use the econometric models and the computable general equilibrium models. There were about 174 equations that were set, and we looked at how the various sectors, interact. It was like an input-output approach. If you put in this from industry, trade, and investment, and this comes from agri, what is the output? So all of these are what have determined what you will say the envelopes that have gone to the various MDAs. So up front, the MDAs have been told what you can spend in 2021, in 2022, in 2023, and in 2024. So you have that ceiling, and you appropriate it to your priority areas. So you might have 1,000 projects and programs, but it has to be, they are also prioritized. So it follows a sequence, and then it's easier for project monitoring. It's easier for the national M&E to also evaluate.
Okay, presumably also, Honorable Minister, the MTEF will also take its bearing from the National Development Plan.
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, we understand that the connection to Professor Uche Waleke is back. You can see him there on the right side of your screen. Professor Waleke, you were just taking off when we lost the audio connection to your Zoom. Please proceed from where you left off.
Yes, thank you, Kingsley. The point I was making is that I see this National Development Plan as unique unique in the sense that for the first time, you have a whole chapter of the plan. There are about 35 chapters in that document. The whole chapter is dedicated to regional development. That's talking about the relationship between the various tiers of government, particularly the interactions between the subnationals, encouraging horizontal intergovernmental relations. By that I mean where 2 states or 3 states can come together to fund the project. So I think that's unique. Another unique aspect I see is also the emphasis on the people with special needs. So for me, that's one evidence of the bottom-up approach that the plan has adopted, one evidence of a participatory approach. And you also find out that in the social development needs section, it tends to address most of the issues we find in the SDGs. So implementation of this plan will be key, just as the plan also recognizes that the success of the plan is hinged on the implementation as well as ceteris paribus condition. By that I mean bearing any exogenous external shocks, because of course, that's majorly what affected the ERGP and also the Vision 2020. You will recall that this plan is actually flowing from that Vision 2020 and the ERGP one. If you remember, the Vision 2020 was introduced in 2009. The first part of that implementation, which began in 2010 to 2013, had an investment size of about 31 trillion naira, out of which the government was supposed to bring 19 trillion, the private sector 12 trillion at the time. So the share of the government sector under Vision 2020 plan was more than that of the private sector. And the over-reliance on that government sector side was also partly responsible for its failure. So this is why I think this time around, the plan is relying more on the private sector, expecting the private sector to bring as much as 85% of the funding, the 348 trillion funding. But let me quickly say here that if you look at the various roles of the stakeholders enumerated in that plan, from the presidency, the National Steering Committee, the PIUs, especially the MDAs. The MDAs are supposed to be the leading implementers of this plan. But the way the MDAs are now, I don't think they're in a position to do that, which is why, in my view, the first step should be the rationalization of MDAs, to make sure that MDAs are rationalized, probably using the Orosanya report, so that we don't have overlapping functions when implementation begins. So that should be the first step. And there should be, in my view, again, a sense of urgency in doing so, given that we've already lost 1 year. This plan is 2021 to 2025, and we are already almost in 2022. So the first thing is to rationalize MDAs, strengthen MDAs to be in a position to even implement this plan. The other good thing I see in the plan is the financing aspect. I had mentioned it earlier, relies more on the private sector. It talks about an investment and growth fund that intends to pool funds from all manner of investors, pension funds, insurance companies, other institutional investors, including people from the diaspora. I think that's a good one. And these funds are going to be invested in commercially viable projects in Nigeria. There is also the infrastructure company, which the central bank has been promoting alongside developmental finance institutions such as the AFC and the NSIA, pension funds as well. So if you take these two together and you also look at what they've also put in there, the credit enhancement frameworks that are in the plan, the contingent liability management frameworks, you will agree with me that I think in terms of financing, even though I consider the 348 trillion as a little ambitious, but I think much of the financing will come if the right environment is created for the private sector.
All right, Honourable Minister, I want you to write on what Professor Waleka has said with respect to funding. All right, that if the right environment is created for the private sector, then the funding could be a possibility. But he also mentioned the fact that why ARGP failed was because of our over-reliance on government for funding. You mentioned earlier that annual budget must flow with the plan. And you know very well that annually when we have a budget, it's a projection that oftentimes do not meet the required funding that is expected to fund the budget proper. So I want you to do some explanations on this. How this current reliance on private sector, how would it be possible for it to drive this national plan?
Okay. Like I said a while ago, the economy is currently being driven by the organized private sector. But the issue has been that there are a lot of binding constraints, and those constraints have been looked at in this plan. How do we remove them to ensure that there's ease of doing business? What type of reforms are required to ensure that the private sector is able to drive? You can maybe take a look at the Ports Authority and look at customs. And you say, is customs a revenue collecting agency, or is customs a trade facilitation agency? And the answer is clear. They should facilitate trade. But in facilitating trade, the revenue would grow. And that's why it's essential that the 774 local governments were part of the development of this plan. That is why it's also important that the states were also part of this development plan, because where the rubber hits the road is actually at the subnational level. So what you find currently is, because of the drive for revenue, there are multiplicity of levies, multiplicity of taxes. All of these are binding constraints. From the ARGP came the ease of doing business, where we've had some substantial improvement. But there's still a lot more that needs to be done. So for this plan, government will not only create the enabling environment, but government will have qualitative participation, not to take over the roles of the private sector, but to complement the private sector. In other climes, the private sector actually drives the economy. And that is why I said this time we have the volume 3, which looks at where we are having policy flip-flops, where there are gaps in policies, where there are legislative gaps that we need to fix in order to enable and get the private sector to drive the economy.
I'm just wondering, Honourable Minister, I've not had the privilege of reading the full document, that's to say the 3 volumes of the National Development Plan. But clarify for us the concept of this development plan, because what I keep reading and what I keep hearing, and I heard that yesterday, I've also heard it today, is this a holistic national development plan, or it's an economic development plan? In other words, does it incorporate the political, economy, and social aspects? Because there is a purport that some of the pillars would cover human capital development, social development, but there's less emphasis on that. And if it does, I'm just wondering what the role of the private sector would be in funding aspects of social development, in funding aspects of human capital development. Okay.
If you look at the plan, we already did mention that there are about 7 clusters. The first one deals around issues of the macroeconomy and then growth. The second one talks about infrastructure, all forms of infrastructure, physical infrastructure, financial infrastructure, digital infrastructure, and innovation infrastructure that are required. Then there is the issue of public administration, that is the governance system itself, how to build in efficiencies into the system. Then there is the human capital development side of things, where you talk about issues around quality of education that will provide, the quality of healthcare that will provide, and more importantly, one area that we have not been paying attention to, the issue of nutrition, which is really embedded in this, because you know that the formative years of a child, especially the first 5 years, are very, very important. And so to deal with the issues of stunting and wasting, and the brain formation is key, because it's something that is invariably going to affect the latter life of the child. So all of those issues are being taken into consideration. There is the issue of social development, which are the areas where the government comes in. Yeah, not only to create an enabling environment, but also to make some form of substantial investment. Like in the area of human capital development, for instance, we've looked at the issue of how to engage the youth, because if you look at the demography, right now, it's about 65% of the population are youths. So there is a strategy or a plan around engagement, empowerment, and employment. So the plan says that for youths in Nigeria, by the year 2025, that's youths here is classified as 35 years and below, that they should either be in school, or they should be gainfully employed, or they should be practicing some form of skills. And that's where we're talking about the issue of giving importance now more to skills and skills acquisition. Because when you talk about unemployment, I think it's the graduates that you have, are they employable? The public sector cannot take all of them. Do they have the necessary skills that are required for the private sector to engage them? Or do they have the necessary skills to start up on their own? So those are some of the missing links. And all of this have been taken into consideration in the plan. Like I said, there were over 1,500 people that developed this plan. About 80% were from the organized private sector. You had NASIMA, you had the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, NESG Group, the Nigerian Economic Society. They all had people at the various technical working groups where a lot of the work was done. That's why I say it's a bottom-up approach. The coordinators of these various technical working groups became members of the central working group because of the need to aggregate all the discussions that have been done at the various technical working groups level. The plan vision, which is to ensure we unlock potentials in all sectors so that for sustainability, holistic, and inclusive development, was also taken into consideration at that central working group, just to ensure that sectors are not working across purposes. Because you might focus on one sector, that sector is growing very fast, but it's limiting the performance of the other sectors. And that's where we talked about those models that were used, where you do the input and output. The whole aim is to catalyze growth across all sectors. Yeah.
Honorable Minister, yesterday I raised my somewhat sentimental attachment to the last development plan that we had by name. That's the one under the Gowon administration, 1970 to 1974. And talked about a number of programs and projects that emerged from that development plan, and what we saw as the evidence of implementation, of course, before we then started having challenges. I'm just wondering, in this respect, I listened to you while you were explaining the human aspects of human capital development, which is interesting. I mean, the aspects relating to nutrition, I do hope that what Akinwumi Adesina developed while he was a Greek minister will be incorporated, because he did aspects of nutrition under the agricultural transformation agenda while he was minister. But one area that we'll be asking ourselves as a plan, we say human capital development. We've had cancer specialists as our guest on Good Morning Nigeria, and it tells us about the acute shortage of cancer specialists, oncologists in Nigeria. Does the plan, for instance, envisage to say, look, by 2025, on account of scholarship offers and training, improved training, we will produce, or we would have, say, 200 or 500 oncologists. By 2025, in terms of human capital development, this is today, 2020 or 2021, this is the literacy rate in Nigeria. By 2025, this is where we ought to be, and this is where we hope to be. We need so many aeronautic engineers by that year, X, Y, Z. Do we have those kinds of numbers so that we then know what we are working towards? Because again, as I raised the point yesterday, UPE, that's Universal Primary Education, we kicked off in 1976, was earlier factored into the preceding plan, by which, by the time the program rolled out in 1976, you knew where you were, you knew where you were going. Honorable Minister.
There are 26 technical working groups, like I said, and for each of those technical working groups, there are broad objectives. There are key performance indicators, and then there are metrics that have been set. With those metrics, we have taken recognition of the baseline, and then the targeted metrics by the year 2025. So to answer your question directly, yes, all of these have been provided on a sector-by-sector basis. You understand? And that is why, like I said, we brought in the various experts in the different areas. And more importantly, we also had the people for which we are making this plan, the youths. They represented almost 50% of those who did this plan, because the future is theirs. They wear the shoes and they know where it impinges. So for instance, in agric, the issue of post-harvest losses is an area where currently the baseline is 60% loss. So without necessarily increasing acreages, where you currently plant, how do we reduce post-harvest losses? Strategies were put around that area. And the target is to ensure that by 2025, at least that number, 60%, is reduced to 30%. You look at the areas of mining. Currently, the baseline is about 0.33% contribution to the economy. In 2021, by 2025, we are looking at 3%. The issue of out-of-school children, the number, currently planned out about 10.5 million. How to drive this? The target is taking it down to 5 million. So for every sector, you have these broad objectives, the key performance indicators, the baseline data, and the target. And that is what the National M&E Department is going to use to monitor, to see whether we are making progress or not. And one of the things that has been done, because, like we said, this is not just a federal thing. It's a national program. We have looked at the current structures that are in place, and use it to also formulate an institutional arrangement for implementation, just like the plan itself was put in place. So for plan implementation, you have a national steering committee to be headed by His Excellency the Vice President. And this is important because you are looking at both vertical and horizontal coordination. The VP is also the chairman of the National Economic Council. And since it's a national plan, you want to be able to see what the sub-nationals are doing. A plan implementation unit is also being set up, which is domiciled in the Federal Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning, the Budget and National Planning arm. But again, that unit looks at, that goes beyond the federal government. The 6 geopolitical zones will be represented. The organized private sectors that are driving it will be members of the PIU. The civil society organizations will be members of the PIU. And because data is important, you find that we have the National Bureau of Statistics, the Budget Office as members of this, the macro department of the Budget and National Planning, and then the National Monetary and Evaluation Department, being members of this PIU. And then the other mechanism that we have, which we use, that helps in the coordination both at the state and the federal level, is the JPB, which is the Joint Planning Board. Across the 36 states, members, that's commissioners of responsible for planning, are members of the Joint Planning Board. And we have a community of practice where we meet every month to review things and review performance.
All right, thank you, Honorable Minister. We've just been informed that another guest has just joined us via Zoom. He's Mr. Atedo Peterside, President and founder, ANAP Foundation. He's also founder of Stanbic IBTC Bank PLC. Good morning, sir, and welcome to the program.
Hi, good morning.
All right, we are almost halfway into the show, but we're glad to have you nevertheless. Let's get your own perspective or views with respect to the newly approved National Development Plan, which is, of course, about to be implemented, all things being equal.
I think I would like to start with the big picture, because some people even question, why do we have this plan? Why this particular time horizon? And I think, let me just clarify that not having a plan is not an option. I've said this repeatedly, because if you don't have a plan, there's a vacuum. If there's a vacuum, even private sector investors don't know what to do in some sectors, because sometimes the investment they are contemplating may clash with the government investment. So they need to know what the government is doing, state government, federal government, so they can plan their own actions and their own decisions in sync with that. And then the other thing I was going to point out for the time horizon is that you can never have a plan of this nature and make it very, very short. That becomes useless. So this plan is 2021 to 2025. Indeed, let's say 2020, yes, almost like a 5-year horizon. 5 years is probably what people need to at least you should answer questions. If you go to, for instance, the ports, and you ask MPA, let me know what you've planned from now till 4 or 5 years down the road. They should have the answers. So this plan is an attempt to fill that vacuum. So let's get that very straight first. And also, it cuts across, it goes beyond the tenure of this government. So an incoming government also cannot start with a blank piece of paper. You need something in front of you that tells you in every sector. I heard the previous speaker or the previous guest, the Honorable Minister, pointing out that we took input from all the sectors possible. And the input came from people from various walks of life. Private sector was heavily represented, including youths. So I think just to put that in perspective, that is the whole reason and reasoning behind the national plan. And the last thing I will say is that it's not a federal government plan. It's a national plan. So it involves federal government. It involves the states and local governments, also involves the private sector. And indeed, in terms of financing, the private sector is supposed to provide something like 85 to 86% of all the financing.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Atedo Peterside, for your opening comments. But let's back up a bit. You're a founder, along with your other colleagues of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, and you've participated in their activities over the years. You also took part in Vision 2010, and at some point going forward, we were told that Vision 2010 wasn't a perfect vision, it would be 2020. So we then had Vision 2020, The desire, of course, being to make Nigeria one of the top 20 economies by year 2020, which was last year. We're not there just yet. You've also had a role, advisory or otherwise, in terms of economic and development strategies. And we are where we are today. What makes you hopeful that, as I asked earlier, this could be a game changer?
You see, Kingsley, that's a very good question. And knowing you, I didn't expect anything less. But please let me try and explain. I tried to explain this on Twitter the other day, that because you were giving a hint of, we've done many plans before Nigeria, and it sound unsatisfied. So it's sort of hinting what's going to change this time. Let me make it very clear. It is impossible to separate economics from politics. Anybody who tries to do that is not a realist. The truth is that your best chance of executing any plan in any government is partly a function of whether there is some political activism supporting and buttressing that plan. In Nigeria's case, sometimes in the past, we have written a document and said, this is the plan. If you just hand over a plan to civil servants, that plan will go onto the shelf. There has to be some political activism. Somebody has to hold the feet of key persons to the fire and say, this is the plan, you're supposed to do this, why haven't you done it, and so on. That's a natural mechanism in a democracy. So the point I'm making is that I like the fact that this plan should be publicized, and I expect Nigerian youths and all and sundry, including yourself, to hold the feet of key persons to the fire and say, this plan said you would do this, why haven't you done it? I'll give you just two examples of things that are easier planned than executed. And they have nothing to do with monitoring, it's about political will. The first one is, somewhere in this plan, they say government's revenue should be 15% of GDP. Right now, it is 6 to 7%, one of the lowest in the world. So how are we going to get it up to 15% of GDP? It sounds ambitious. It's not so ambitious because currently, quote me, currently, we are throwing away trillions of revenue of government in an unaffordable petrol subsidy. So I'm going to show you that these things are all connected. The second area I will give you, somewhere in this plan, it says all these government agencies, they should limit their expenditure to 50% of the revenues they bring in. I'm sure, Kingsley, you know various arms of government agencies, that what they do is that all the revenue they bring in, they themselves consume it. They finish it on themselves. Now, if you allow them to continue doing that, they will do it forever. This is why I say that every plan must be backed by some political activism. You must have people, key persons in government, in the private sector, civil society, and who will hold people's feet to the fire. Without that, the plan is just a document.
Well, I think Mr. Peter's side, hit the nail on the head by saying that there's no plan that can work, without the political will of the politicians in power to enable it to, get properly implemented. And these are the issues we raised previously with respect to the fact that we have had development plans in this country before now. But because of inclusiveness and, of course, allowing the private sector to play a key role in the designing of this plan, we now believe that it's going to be a game changer. So let's bring in Professor Waleke once more. You listened to the Honorable Minister a short while ago, and, of course, Mr. Peter's side, hitting on some of a very pertinent aspect of this conversation, which has to do with the proper implementation, data analysis, ensuring that what has been set out in the plan can be achieved. Now, if we want to believe what all the guests have been saying since yesterday, it does appear that the private sector is being trusted to be the major financier of this plan. And understanding our own concept in terms of how the private sector and government relate. We've had a PPP in the past that never worked the way we expected. Now, how will the private sector play this role? What are the encumbrances you think could make it difficult for the private sector to play the very key role that's expected of it in this very new plan?
Thank you, Kieran. You see, this plan, from what we hear, is actually part of Agenda 2050 that the government has. So this is more like the first leg of the Agenda 2050, and it seeks to achieve over the 5-year period an average real GDP growth rate of 5%. It also seeks to lift 35 million people out of poverty and create 21 million jobs. Now, the point has been made here very clearly that you cannot divorce politics from economics. And in most cases, what you find is that politics trumps economics. So when you look at the financing, which is giving a lot of weight to the private sector, it all means that the business environment has to be right before the private sector can make any meaningful contribution. 85% of the funding is huge, coming from the private sector. And the interesting thing there too, I want to note, is that the government has said that it is going to now rely more on domestic borrowing. By that I mean, in terms of whatever they're going to borrow, be more of domestic. And for external borrowing, it will be concessional. But borrowing isn't the bulk of the financing. As I mentioned earlier, the government is thinking of leveraging the infrastructure company, the 15 trillion infra company, the investment and growth fund, where they intend to get about between 5 billion or 10 billion dollars. There is also the contingent liability management framework and the rest that I mentioned earlier. Then PPP is critical, and for that to happen, the business environment has to be right, which is why in the plan there is a target to reach in terms of ranking, ease of business ranking, to move from the baseline of 131 ranking to 100 by the year 2025. So if we can move from 131 to 100, looking at the pillars of ease of doing business, whether ease of registering business, starting a business, ease of paying taxes, contract and enforcement, resolving insolvency, all the pillars of ease of doing business. So if they can be touched on, I think the private sector will be in a position to play. Again, a major aspect of the plan, if you look at the major clusters, one of them is infrastructure. And of course, we can't over-label the fact that infrastructure is an enabler, a major enabler. And that's why in the plan, the emphasis is on the roads, is on rail, is on port, is on power, electricity, in particular. But again, I also want to reiterate that all of these depend on, of course, the function of revenue, how much revenue comes in, and how it is implemented. The point about politics and economics is very key, and that's why continuity of the plan, particularly given the fact that we are going to have by 2023, May 2023, the key players, the key actors in this plan won't be there any longer. They may not be there any longer. Talking about the from the presidency to the ministers, even the joint planning board that has as members commissioners of finance in various states, they won't be there by 2023. They may not be there. Some other new actors will have come on board, and that's why it is critical that the implementation plan is ring-fenced by way of legislation, to ensure that whoever comes on board, whether it's the same party or another party by 2023, whoever comes on board is bound to implement it to the letter up to 2025, because that has been the bane of development plans we've had in this country, starting from 1962 to 1968, the first one we had, down to the even the latest one, inconsistency and policy somersaults as a result of changes in government.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Uche Waleke, for your viewpoint. Now, we were talking about ring fencing the National Development Plan. The Honorable Minister of State already spoke to that earlier on, and yesterday the Honorable Minister of Finance also talked about that. There are benefits, there are also disadvantages, because if you have a law, the rule of law would expect you to abide by the law. So when, therefore, there are changing circumstances and you need to make changes, what do you do? You go back to the National Assembly, and the process often can't be seen to be easy. But thanks a lot for the points that you have raised, Professor Uche Waleke. I want to come back to the Honorable Minister of State Budget and National Planning. That's the issue of the role of politics in all of this. Again, I confess that I don't have the details of the projects and programs that have been compiled in the second volume of the 3-volume National Development Plan. Just off the cuff, do the programs and projects include programs and projects by state governments and local governments?
First, majorly is that of the federal government, but because of the regional development aspect of it, and to ensure that all regions are covered, we also reach out to the states to understand the priority projects that are required in the specific regions. Those were captured. It is expected that the various states will also try and domesticate this plan, since they are part and parcel of the plan, because if we're all heading in the same direction, then we would be able to make a lot of growth. Talking about the issue of politics and the political will, I think that has clearly been shown. First, with what we have done in Volume 3, one of those things in Volume 3 was the PIB, which is now a PIA. It's already been done. Atedo Peterside was very, very right when he talked about the issue of revenue contribution to GDP. Currently, it's about 7%, and that makes us 154 out of 156 countries. But we've already started taking measures to deal with that in the strategic revenue growth initiatives. And what he said about the 50% in terms of cost from the GOEs, we've also started implementation. In the past, we would wait till the year is over, do reconciliation before you take the money. But what we are doing now, because of technology, is to take 50% upfront. As the revenue is coming in, we are taking it up. And what we have seen with the 2022 budget, doing this, we will be able to unlock about 1.83 trillion, which should help reduce a deficit, and this will be put into capital expenditure.
You know, Honorable Minister, the issue of politics and development in Nigeria is a tough one.
It is.
And I asked the question about whether state and local government projects and programs were also incorporated.
Yeah.
We have seen instances in this country where a state government will wake up because the governor is in charge and he says, look, we want to have an airport. Yeah. We wake up and say, we want to have a university. We want to have our own polytechnic. We want to have our own colleges of education, and so on and so forth. And the viability of all of this, nothing has been factored in, essentially, or nothing arises from a national development plan. And those airports or institutions will be sited often in the village of the governor. And then you're asking yourself, what is the value of all this? The cost of building an airport is enough for you to expand your rural infrastructure. So did you get the buy-in to say, look, let's manage our deviation? Because there's also the problem of federalism and the constitutional arrangements, that the governor will tell you that I'm elected, so I'm the CEO of my state. Did you get their buy-in to say, look, at some point, we will try to manage the deviation from the National Development Plan, which will be inevitable anyway?
To answer the question very straight, yes, we got their buy-in, because the sub-nationals are the critical stakeholders. Like I said initially, that's where the rubber hits the road, and that is why they were all involved in the preparation of the plan. Each of the states had 2 reps in each of the 26 technical working groups. The Governors Forum itself were represented at the Central Working Group. And then we had 6 governors from the 6 geopolitical zones across different parties in the National Steering Committee. Having said that, like you said, this is not a unitary government. You know, the states are also on their own. And that's why we are saying, having participated in this plan and agreed to what has been put in place, we expect that in the implementation, they should also do it in the states. It is only when we do that collectively that the economy will grow. The issue of rural development, for instance, it's a major deviation from the previous plan. Okay, rural development has always been seen as part of agric. And there's a whole chapter on rural development, integrated rural development, you know, to focus on. 60% of our people live in the rural areas. In terms of infrastructure deficit, it is highest in the rural areas. Those who feed us, they live in the rural areas. One reason that the post-harvest losses is huge is because of access to the market. And so we said, okay, develop attention to rural, integrated rural development, where you take infrastructure to the rural areas. And this infrastructure will be on roads. It will be infrastructure in terms of telecommunication, broadband technology. It will be off-grid power to these areas. And when you do so, you find that it's going to solve a whole lot of problems. One, it will help discourage our youth moving from the rural areas to urban areas. So it will stem rural-urban migration. If that is achieved, that will be solving a problem of urban slump. And it's also solving a problem of insecurity in the urban areas. If you stay in the village and you are able to transact your business seamlessly, the quality of life is better. Why do you want to move? So when you take development there and create those access roads, you are also creating a motivation for investors to move towards those areas. Aggregators will go there to buy up what has been produced from the farms. Value-adding industries will begin to come in. You start to process, you start to store, so that it's not only during the season where harvest comes that you find some set of particular products. They will be able to cover a whole lot of areas. The issue of sports is another area where we have a major deviation. Today, sports is seen as leisure, but this plan speaks to sports being business. Because when you look at contribution of sports to national development, it is 0.005%. You understand, with all the resources that are put there, because it is not seen as a business. So there are strategies around changing it, making it to be business. And sports is not just federal. It is also states and local government. And that's why it was very critical to get in Algon also in the process. That's the local government. Yes, the Constitution gives certain responsibilities, you know, to states, to local government, and then to federal government. And then each time we talk about government, I think there is also a misconception. Everyone sees it as federal government. If there's no road in my village, it's federal government. You know, if there's no primary school, it is federal government. So some of those issues are clear in the Constitution. Basic education, basic health. But at the federal level, there are also mechanisms that have been put in place to help support the subnationals to deal with the issues of education and also the issues of health. So I want to believe that having been part of the process of the development of the plan, that the governors themselves will also take ownership and begin to implement the plans also in their states.
Rightly said, you know, because of what the nation has experienced over the years, you know, these governors, as Kingsley pointed out, will always say, look, I am in charge here, and I'm not, my party is not at the center. That means all developmental plans that are in a concurrent list, as far as I'm concerned, I'll take my own bearing.
Yeah.
All right, it's okay. But let's take a short break now. When we come back, the conversation will continue. All right, thanks for staying with us on the program. And right now, let's return to Mr. Peter's side. So you're a man from the private sector, you have a private sector background, and we learned that you are also a co-chair of the current National Development Plan, which has, of course, inculcated the issue of regional development, as the minister just explained a short while ago. But we are looking at this plan as a well coordinated plan that will involve the private sector. At a point, we've learned that the private sector is going to play a key role in terms of financing, the development plan. Let us know how much of this will come from the private sector with respect to ease of doing business, with respect to other encumbrances that may come from the side of government. How will the private sector fare? How is it going to really, develop the muscle to be able to do this? Because this is the first time that a development plan is being anchored on the financial muscle of the private sector. So let us know how this is going to be possible, because without the private sector, from what we have learned, this development plan might go like the previous ones.
Sorry, okay, let me explain something. There's a misconception in Nigeria. People think that the government sector, the 3 tiers of government is large, government is huge. In terms of economic activity, overall economic activity, the private sector dwarfs the government. I always use the numbers on aggregate demand. Aggregate demand means the sum total of goods and services being bought. As of middle of this year, private sector share is 91.5%. The 3 tiers of government together is 8.5%. Look, Nigeria is a private sector economy. There are complete towns and villages where almost all the workers are working for the private sector. So this plan is just based on realism. So as you can see, I've said in terms of aggregate demand, the private sector accounts for 91.5%. So all things being equal, if you were doing a plan for the whole country, you should even be expecting the private sector to also bring pro rata 91.5%. That it is 85 to 86% means that the private sector's, the expectations on the private sector are actually slightly less than their own share of aggregate demand. But I think I know where you are going with your question, and let me go straight to the point. You see, the private sector investment decisions are voluntary. At 85% or 86% is voluntary, which means if I'm happy, I can bring out money and make an investment. If I'm unhappy, I'm worried, or I'm afraid, I can take my money and run away from the country, run to Canada or anywhere. So, although the government's overall share of the economy is small in terms of finance, it is the government that is responsible for the enabling environment that makes the private sector either want to stay here and invest or to pack up their bags and run away, because government is in charge of policy. So it is good policies can encourage the private sector. There can be so much enthusiasm from the private sector, local and foreign investors, that even bring more money than you expect. Conversely, and you all know, we're all Nigerians, depending on what happens with security, law and order, confidence, government pronouncements, government actions, you can have the opposite effect, which is the private sector people running away, all trying to emigrate and trying to repatriate their, only interested in only one thing, to get out. So you're right that the private sector is like a barometer. Their actions and activities are determined in part whether they have confidence in the government. So there's an extent to which if the government behaves in a way that confidence is high, then you can more than meet the expectations from the private sector. But let's not kid ourselves that the private sector must bring its part. What this calculation is based on the fact that the private sector can play its part if motivated, if the right policies are in place, the right body language from government and all. And I say this because we've all been through periods when some government actions really hurt or wounded the private sector. If you carry out any more of those types of actions, you will get the expected reaction. But there's one other comment I was going to make, just because I'm not here for very long, unfortunately. It was the previous question, where I think that there was an attempt to find out what exactly binds state governors to follow everything in the plan, especially governors that come in 2 years' time or in 18 months' time, and so on. Yes, you can put anything in legislation, but your best protection is whether your plans make sense. If your plans make sense, then there's a higher potential that an incoming governor will look at the plans and say, oh, this is all very sensible, so I will stick with it and play my part. Of course, there are two reasons why people may abandon your plans. One, it could be ignorance, or two, they may just disagree completely. I'll give you just one last example that has always happened. Take airports. Everybody who knows geography knows that Port Harcourt Airport is pretty close to the Owerri Airport. It didn't matter. It didn't matter what plans federal government had to expand the Port Harcourt Airport. Imo, under Simon Bakwe, was always going to build their own airport on that same road. The two airports are on the road from Port Harcourt to Owerri. Similar thing with Uyo. It didn't matter what federal government planned to do with Calabar. The people of Akwa Ibom and their governor were always going to build an airport in Uyo, which is not far away. And more recently, we have the same in Anambra. Everybody knows how close Anambra is to Asaba. Again, it didn't matter what federal government or Delta State government wanted to do with Asaba Airport. Anambra decided they must build another airport, even if the runways are almost next to each other. So there's always going to be an element of that, and that's why the minister said we're in a federation. See, we're in a federation, every state is independent. If the governor and the people of that state insist that they must have they must use their money for an Anambra airport, nobody can stop them. But so that's why I said that the best protection is if you make good, realistic plans, then you can convince them to make sure that they work in sync with you. It's the quality of the planning and the dialogue that will control, that will minimize that disagreement. Thank you.
Mr. Atedo Peters, we know that you have to run right now or presently, but if you don't mind, let me give you this question, and then you can proceed your response. In seeking to motivate and magnetize the private sector investment so that we can get this percentage of investment in the development plan or higher, how much attention was paid to industrialization? Because after the structural adjustment program, the country began to deindustrialize. And some of the economic challenges that we're having today arise from the fact that the country, of course, has not exactly reindustrialized. There are all kinds of plans and programs out there, the industrial master plan, gas master plan, sugar master plan, and all kinds of plans. How many ideas from all of these pre-existing plans were factored in to ensure that Nigeria is on the path of reindustrialization so that the economy is on a much sounder footing?
You know, Kingsley, again, that's an excellent question. You know, we have to be careful about all this industrialization, agriculture. Those are the sectors that were very, very important and existed when you and I were little boys. If you look at this plan, you will find that there are some other activities that in those days were never mentioned. I put it to you, and you can check, that the fastest growing sector, quote me, by far the fastest growing sector of the Nigerian economy in 2020 was the sector called ICT. Let's not get fixated on the ancient all the time. agriculture. Once you talk about the economy, people talk about agriculture, farming, things. Our grandfathers were farmers. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to disrespect today's farmers. I'm saying that, but there are new sectors. There are new Nigerian companies. We're talking about fintech. We're talking about tech. We're talking about big tech. And in any case, the evidence is there. How much did those old sectors grow last year? By far the fastest growing, the only one with double digits was ICT. So let's respect that. Let us move government policy also to recognize and accept that the young people in ICT may be the ones that will take us to great heights. Second area I will mention, this is the first plan that I have seen where there's been considerable emphasis in a sector called CCHT. What is that? It sounds like Greek. It's not. It's culture, creative sector, hospitality and tourism. You see, Nigeria has become a soft power, whether we like it or not. When we talk about creative, we're talking about music, film, art, fashion. In all those activities, Nigeria and Nigerians, young Nigerians, have taken us to progressively become a soft power and almost a global power. I personally felt very proud. I was at Heathrow Airport in London. Guess the music they were playing? It was from a Nigerian artist, Simi. I walked into Selfridges, the biggest department store on Oxford Street. Guess the music they were playing? It was a song by Burna Boy. So whether we like it or not, there are other areas where we are becoming leaders. So let us not, yes, we will try our best with the conventional, agriculture, manufacturing, oil and gas, and so on. But let's remember, there's more to life than those things. And it may well be that the people who will transform this country will be those in ICT, those those who transform Nigeria to be a soft power. And please don't dismiss one thing. It's not every country that can be a soft power in culture. If you go to South Africa, they're playing Nigerian music. You go to Morocco, they're playing Nigerian music. It's not true for other countries. We have become a soft power, and that is largely on account of our youth. UK was a soft power. They dominated pop music as well. US was a soft power. They dominated, pop and soul music. Everybody cannot do it. So it looks as if Nigeria is going to be an emergent soft power. So to this same youth that we ridicule, that we insult, we call them names, they may very, very well be the ones that will make us proud at a faster rate than we think from all these manufacturers and Greek projects and all. Those things are useful, yes, but the world does not stand still. We're not talking about things like, artificial intelligence. We're talking about fintechs. These are new areas where Nigeria must be active. So that's why I want to leave on that note, an optimistic note, that even if we don't succeed in the conventional areas, perhaps we can leapfrog and do exciting things in these new areas where already we're showing very good signs. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much indeed for your contribution. Kingsley, I didn't know that such a man who is into business and is interested also in music and noting even Nigerian musicians. I'm glad because
he's a Lagos boy.
Okay, Lagos.
old boy of King's College.
King's College.
Polo
Okay.
player.
Okay. All right, sir. Thank you indeed for your contribution. We hope to have you again when we bring up issues concerning national development. Mr. Atedo Peter Side, President and founder of ANAP Foundation and also founder of Stanbic IBTC Bank. Thank you for sharing your time and your thoughts on this edition of Good Morning Nigeria. All right. Let's return to Professor Waleke. We don't have time now, but we need to talk on this. That's the question Kingsley posed to Mr. Atedo Peter Side with respect to the issue of industrialization. After all said and done, a country that relies on importation of over 80% of what it requires to exist, of course, is not doing pretty well. What is it for industrialization and manufacturing that you find in this new document for national development?
Yes, thank you, Kingsley. For manufacturing, I think the target is clear, to move from a baseline of about 10% contribution to GDP to somewhere around 13% contribution to GDP by 2025. And that can't happen, of course, without enabling infrastructure, particularly power. And closely tied to this is also the issue of what is happening, what the plan has for the informal sector. I think the plan is intentionally also pursuing the idea of formalizing the informal sector, because if you formalize the informal sector, you're also aiding industrialization, and you're also expanding the potentials for revenue generation on the part of the government. Because when you hear that revenue is 6% of GDP, it actually excludes the informal sector. That 6% is what is coming more from the formal sector. And if we are to achieve 15% revenue GDP, it means the bulk of the informal sector, which we understand is over 50% of our GDP, must be formalized. This much, resonated very much in the just concluded conference on the National Economic, the National Council on Finance and Economic Development Conference, which ended yesterday. Let me make this point, Kirian, before time runs out. That one thing I would have loved to see in that plan, which I have not seen, I don't know whether there's a document that has it, is the risk management strategy. Because if you look at the plan, it's rightly identified reasons why the previous plans failed, and one of the reasons it mentioned there has to do with the negative domestic and external shocks. So in this plan, we have risk management strategy, a section that addresses risk management strategy, a strategy to identify these risks, in good time, appraise them, measure them, with a view to controlling, and mitigating them, such that they don't become an excuse for failure of the 2021-25 the plan. Okay. So risk management strategy is very important, and I think it's important we add it to that plan if it is not there.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Professor Uche Uwaleke. Let's come back now to the Honorable Minister of State, Budget and National Planning for your closing thoughts. I know it's been very engaging. We can go on and on for another hour or more.
Yeah. And even on the issue of industrialization.
Yeah, thank you very much. I know you seem to be very particular about the issue of industrialization. Exactly. And like the industrialization itself cannot stand on its own. Like I said, we have looked through a lot of constraints. One area of constraint is power, which also has a dedicated section in the plan to deal with the issue of either national grid or off-grid to expand the access to power. But more critical about the issue of industrialization are two major binding constraints. There's what you call the collective know-how, which is you will call a product space, and then the product complexities that needs to be worked on. In every sector of the economy, you need know-how. And what we find right now is that the know-how that we have is low in specific areas. You can take maybe the textile industry. It starts from planting of cotton to going to degen, doing your thread, and then doing, you understand? So it's a whole chain. Or you come also to the oil and gas industry, both either upstream, midstream, or downstream. You have to have a collective know-how that will grow that sector. Like I once made an analogy to someone. He said that a monkey can jump from a tree to tree without falling. It's because the trees are close. Mm. So if you don't have that know-how, it becomes a real issue. Then the other one is our product complexity. Once we're able to deal with the issue of the product space, which has to do with that know-how, then the complexity of our product will now be enhanced. And what that will do is that we begin to earn more dollars. So, because when you look at the foreign exchange regime, what is the challenge that we have? Why is it that the exchange rate is high? It's because we are earning fewer dollars and we are demanding more dollars.
And,
so if you look at the economy today, like we say, the economy is diversified because a lot of the people still have the misconception that it's a mono-dependent economy and we are not diversified. That's not true.
Okay, Honourable Minister, I'm not cutting you short, but of course, time's on our side.
Yeah.
But you you believe, quite frankly, that there is need for us to industrialize.
Of course, that's
when
why
we talk about know-how, which you just mentioned a short while ago, analysts have also made it clear, that there are many Nigerians outside Nigeria who have the know-how, who are working for other industrialized nations. But I think that perhaps next time we'll dwell on that more specifically. Right. Thank you very much for being here this morning. Honourable Minister of State, Budget and National Planning, Mr. Clem Abba. Thank you indeed for being here this morning.
Thank you for having me.
All right. We also like to appreciate Chairman, Chartered Institute of Bankers of Nigeria and former Commissioner for Finance, Imo State, Professor Uche Uwaleke. Prof, it's been nice talking to you this morning. Thank you indeed for your thoughts and, of course, sharing your knowledge on this very important issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Kieran. Thanks, Kinsley.
All right, let's go over to sports.
Well, Kieran, I think we're out of time.
Out of time for sports, okay.
That's right. We're out of time for sports. We'd like to thank you for tuning in. Good Morning Nigeria returns tomorrow, same time, 7 o'clock in the morning. Until then, do take care of yourselves. I am Kingsley Osadolo.
And I am Kieran. You might have a great day.